Welcome, RevCube listeners, to our latest conversation. We are delighted to introduce the CEO and founder of the Menopause Hub, Loretta Dignam. Loretta, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Cathal. Great to be here.
Thanks for joining us, Loretta. I know we've seen a lot of each other over the last few weeks. We had a Best Workplace for Women's event, and you were a panelist on that, so thank you for that. So, Loretta, for our audience, you might take them through your own sort of career history and how that led to the start of the Menopause Hub.
Yeah, well, put it this way. Until about 5 years ago, I never knew anything about menopause and had nothing to do with menopause. So it was just personal experience and how I kind of stumbled upon this that caused me to set up the Menopause Hub. So I had about 25 years in the corporate sector. I worked for great businesses, for Mars Inc., the chocolate and pet food company, for Diageo, for Kerry Group, Jacob Fruitfield, our DAG group, and so on. And I worked in marketing, communications and branding in fairly senior roles. I also was on the board of the Abbey Theatre. I chaired their gender equality committee when there was a big issue around gender equality back in 2015, 2016. Now, it wasn't something that was only happening at the Abbey, but the Abbey being the biggest national theatre, being the national theatre and the biggest theatre in Ireland, it was an issue. And we took a leadership position on that and started to address through policy and guides and so on to address the gender imbalance. I also lectured in the Michael Smurf Business School on their MBA the MBA and MSc programs. And then at 49, I had what was to be my last period. I didn't know it was my last period until 12 consecutive months later. But very soon after that, I got hot flushes. And they were the only two things I knew about menopause. And to be honest, Cathal, I would have thought I was reasonably intelligent, reasonably well-educated, sort of woman of the world. And I was completely blindsided by that experience of menopause. And so I suppose, I don't know if you'd say ignorant or uneducated or whatever about it, I had never heard the word perimenopause. And we're only going back about, 6-7 years ago. I'd never heard the word perimenopause. And so all the symptoms that happened to me in the lead up to the final period meant that I didn't connect those symptoms with being menopausal. And so things, for example, I had headaches and my GP sent me for a brain scan, which luckily came back clear. And then very soon after that, I got focal migraine. I did not realise that is a symptom of perimenopause. So I was going off getting those individual things checked out. Anyway, to cut a long story short, 3 years after putting up symptoms that I was aware of, and in total about 8-9 years of symptoms, I sought help. And my journey, when I got the medical help I needed through hormone replacement therapy, led me to then feel much better and to feel really good in myself. And then I started questioning and asking other women about their experiences to find out that they weren't really that different. And I decided, well, I was so incensed by it all, to be quite honest with you. I decided I was going to down tools, leave the corporate sector and start Ireland's first dedicated menopause clinic, which I did in the beginning of 2019. And just to say that when I was setting that up, there was a woman in the UK setting up a clinic, and they were the only two dedicated menopause clinics in the world. So that was my journey. So from the corporate world to menopause. And I would have to say it wasn't something that was in any of my career goals.
Wow. So there was so many years of discovery there and trying to figure out what is going on, I guess, right? And I know it's a journey, right? And slowly but surely there's more education out there, perhaps, and more conversation, and you're very much leading the charge in terms of that really important conversation in society and from a workplace point of view. Talk to me about what the Menopause Hub does and specifically around how it impacts around the workplace.
Yeah, so I started off with this notion, I suppose, that if I could wave a magic wand, I would want every woman in Ireland to know what menopause is, why it happens, how it impacts them, and that there is treatment options available, and to know the fact from the fiction, because there's an awful lot of myths surrounding it. A lot of myths I believed, which I found out were then not necessarily true. And so that's what I wanted to do from the outset, was this wave this magic wand. Obviously, there's no such thing as magic wand. So I decided if the best thing I could do was start with practical help. So we started with menopause clinics. And so we're a centre of excellence, the leading centre of excellence for menopause in Ireland. And we have 3 clinics, 2 in Dublin, 1 in Cork. And we open the clinics. We have a team of doctors, psychologists, women's health physiotherapists, dietitian and nutritionists, and we provide evidence-based treatment for women experiencing perimenopausal menopause and any other type of menopause. But alongside that, I've done a lot of advocacy and spoken to ministers and government and so on, trying to destigmatise menopause and to smash the taboo and to make menopause mainstream. And I think that's where the solution lies, is making it a normal conversation. So I've done a lot around that. And then the third area I've focused on is that when I did research, I did market research because there was no information available about menopausal women in Ireland at all. So I did my own research, and what came up when I looked at women in the workplace, because I had been a woman in the workplace going through menopause, the statistics were so startling that it prompted us to develop training, to talk to organisations about policy development, and to help them become more menopause friendly. So some of the statistics are that, somewhere between 7 and 10% of women leave work because of menopause symptoms. In Ireland, that's about 30,000 women. In the UK, it's about 1 million women. And then obviously you go more globally and the numbers increase. And about just over a third considered giving up work due to their symptoms. And menopause often hits at the age when women are going into those stages of their life where they're taking on more responsibility. They're moving into more senior positions. They may be taking up board positions and so on. And that coincides with when menopause can happen. So although we're promoting diversity and inclusion in lots of organisations, this can be sort of mitigating. So it was that prompted me to introduce CPD accredited training for menopause in the workplace. And that's the 3 strands of the business: the clinical part, the advocacy, and the menopause in the workplace training.
Thanks, Loretta. And I don't know if it's right to say, but if the topic of menopause is perhaps still a taboo subject in some workplaces, right? If that's the case, like in your experience, like how do we break down the taboo of the menopause?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, it is taboo still in many workplaces. And some of the research we did, we asked women, and last year we had over 3,000 participants, menopausal women, in our research. So a really robust sample of Irish women, actually. But the numbers are pretty much the same when you go globally, because it's not just an Irish issue or an English issue or a British issue, it's a global issue. And by 2030, there's going to be 1.1 billion menopausal women on the planet, which is about 12.5% of the global population. And every year, 47 million newly menopausal women will come into that. So we're talking about half the global population being impacted at some point by menopause, and the other half being impacted directly or indirectly, because these menopausal women are not only individuals, but they're wives, partners, mothers, relatives, friends, but they're also colleagues, direct reports, line managers, teammates, peers, and so on. So I think in the workplace, it's still taboo. So when we asked the women in the research, they said over 90% said that they wanted training for line managers and HR, and over 90% wanted a menopause in the workplace policy. And then when we've done this research a year later, it seems there's about 10 or 11% of organisations are actually tackling both those, training for managers in HR and menopause policies. So any companies out there with that are in the top echelons globally, in the top 10, 11% in the world who are addressing this. So how do you do it? Well, it's about breaking down stigma and taboo, and it's about education. And it's really about opening up that conversation in the workplace. And I would liken it a bit to mental health, where mental health was about 10, 15 years ago. And, we didn't talk about mental health at work. And now a lot of organizations have policies, have supports in place through their EAP programs. They have training for staff. They have mental health first aiders. I think menopause is not dissimilar to that, and that you can take some of those tools and implement them. So a menopause policy is best practice, training for all staff or all colleagues, training for managers, HR, introducing what we call menopause champions, which are like mental health first aiders, and then looking at the impact and tracking that over time. And I won't say it's as simple as that, because maybe that's not simple, but it is no more complex than that.
Focusing in on, let's say, that 11%, the top 11% globally that are really proactive in terms of this space. What are you hearing back, Loretta, in terms of the benefits that they're experiencing from that?
It's early days in terms of, kind of a tangible, measurable impact in terms of women saying, do they stop considering leaving work, or have they stopped leaving work? It's a bit early for those, sort of hard data. But what we are hearing back is, particularly from individuals who are impacted, that they feel more comfortable, more confident, that they feel that their workplace values them, that they feel that if they have an issue, they will be supported. And therefore, the sense of dread or whatever isn't as bad. And for those impacted by menopause, it's actually that, that they can still be supported to do a great job. And for employers, it's really about talent retention, because they don't want their staff to leave. I mean, women in their, mid 40s, 50s, and a little bit older, they're a wealth of talent. They're a wealth of personal experience, of life experience, as well as work experience. We've invested in these individuals in terms of training and development. And realistically, employers can't really afford for women to be walking out of the workplace, or even considering or stepping back or cutting down their hours or not going for the promotions. So I think there's a benefit for the individuals as well as the employers and employees, but also, for colleagues to feel that they know what to do or how to cope. They're not embarrassed, that kind of thing. But there's also a legislative benefit. And in the UK, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, just 2 weeks ago, published guidelines around how to support colleagues going through menopause in the workplace. And the media headlines were about warning employers that there's legislative risk. And the risk has been seen because menopausal women have taken cases and won in employment tribunals on the grounds of gender discrimination, age discrimination, and disability. Now, as a woman, I don't want menopause to be considered a disability, but in some instances, the symptoms were so chronic that they spilled over into longer health effects, and therefore it was considered a disability. But if you take those 2-3 areas, gender discrimination, age discrimination, disability, it means that employers need to be careful about how they handle those situations. And so I think, it will help employers if they're not persuaded by the business case around retention, around performance, around duty of care for staff, then they'll definitely be persuaded by the stick approach, which is the legislative risk. So I think there's benefits actually to multiple stakeholders, really.
Yeah, there's lots of benefits. And ultimately, it's the right thing to do, right? So it's about meeting people where their life moments are at, male or female. And if, we talk a lot about it. We want people to bring their whole self to work, their full self to work. And that's important in terms of performance. So this is important. I was interested there when you were kind of comparing to where mental health was a number of years ago. And then one of the things we've seen, Loretta, is that when an organization will say, does a talk on mental health, but doesn't necessarily have the structure or the practice to go with it, sometimes it can be almost the wrong thing to do, because you've dialed people up on a topic that's important to them or that they're experiencing themselves, and then there's nowhere for them to go in terms of a support or a structure or practice. I'm thinking about the listeners, Loretta, so let's say they're going to now go and do something in terms of the menopause within their workplace. What's that combination of practice they should think about?
I think depending on the size of the organization, particularly if you're a bit bigger, I would actually, do some focus groups among those who are working in the organisation to get an understanding of what it's like to work there experiencing menopause, perimenopause symptoms. I would also do some baselines. A baseline survey only needs to be 5 or 6 questions to get an understanding from those impacted and those not impacted by menopause directly about what their learning is, their understanding about their level of comfort or confidence to have a conversation around that, and how it impacts those that are impacted in work. And that will give data. So you'll have the qualitative stuff, but you'll also have some data around it. And it doesn't need to be a huge complex questionnaire. 5 or 6 questions will give you all that you need to know. And what that will do is kind of frame the extent of the issue in your organization. And obviously the profile of your organization is important. You know, if you're an all-male organization with everyone under the age of, 35, well, maybe menopause isn't so relevant to you. But if you're an organization that has mixed gender and mixed age groups, you may then want to do that. So I think getting the information and the data, like you would about anything, if you wanted to find out about a new product with customers, you go out and talk to your customers, you get quantitative and qualitative data. It's the same thing for your internal customers or your employees. And then once you get that, you get a sense of, what might be important. Then I would start on the education piece, which is, all colleagues getting an understanding of what menopause is. And the other thing is that, and just as you just said there, it's all very well to talk about that and, as you say, heighten expectations. But for those individuals impacted, if they then go and speak to their line manager and the line manager goes, well, I don't know anything about this, or that's nothing to do with me, go to HR, or we don't have any policy, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Well, then that's a very imbalanced kind of conversation. So in addition to educating people at the ground level, you need to then obviously bring managers in, some education, some awareness and some training about how to have that conversation. And then you need to also look at your organization and say, look, what supports should we put in place? What supports can we put in place? And the solution really lies around what we call reasonable accommodation and reasonable adjustments, like it does in anything. So menopause is, not dissimilar to any other kind of health condition, really. And so therefore you go, what are the reasonable things that we can put in place? Accommodations, whether they're physical environment, so it can be temperature control, access to bathrooms, access to free sanitary products, access to cold water, uniforms, looking at the pieces, looking at the material, the design, that kind of thing. Or it can be other things around flexible working, around additional supports for women who experience brain fog or memory loss, those kind of things. So it's really around looking at all the things you can do in your organization. And then in order to make it consistent so that if individual A goes to manager B, they get one answer, and then individual X goes to manager Y and they get a completely different answer. Well, that's not fair to your staff or to your managers. So policy development is really good around bringing consistent supports so that people can respond equally and in the same way to all of that. So I would be saying, measure the problem and get a sense of the baseline, and then you can track it and measure it over time, actually, and measure impact. Very simple, few questions, a couple of small focus groups. Then you go into education and training for line managers and supervisors, but for all colleagues, for HR. And then, as I said, sort of menopause champions. And all of that will actually help inform your menopause workplace policy. And then you may have, as part of your insurance program or your EAP, access to additional supports. You may have occupational health that can help with additional supports, and maybe risk management might be required in some instances. And then you can also, sign up with services like our own, whereby we can actually help, we can offer appointments to your staff that are virtual, and that you can give them practical support. And then I suppose once you've done all that, which is fabulous, you can enter our Menopause Workplace Excellence Awards, which we've launched in conjunction with Great Place to Work. We had the first the inaugural year of the awards last year, and we're bringing out workplace accreditation now, that you can be accredited for 2 years as a menopausal workplace of excellence. So I think there's multiple things organisations can do, and I think it's about starting on the journey, not trying to reinvent the wheel. You may have done other things in other areas that you can bring on board. So I think that's what I would call the best practice template, if you like. And I don't know if that sounds accessible or easy enough, but it doesn't have to cost a fortune. It doesn't have to be giving 10 days menopause leave, which, you know, companies like the Bank of Ireland have done. And it doesn't have to go that far, but it does need to have people who feel that they can open up the conversation, that they'll be listened to in an empathetic and confidential way, but also that there will be supports and a response in place that's consistent across the organisation. I hope I've kind of summarised it well enough there.
You've given us a great roadmap there, Loretta. You really have. Interested in the idea of allyship, right? And have you seen much evidence when you're out there with workplaces in terms of male allyship when it comes to this topic?
Would you believe? Yes. I think organisations are saying, right, you know, if you want to be a great leader and a great manager, you know, you need to be capable of having conversations about anything really with your staff. And I think, you know, you alluded to it when we're talking about people bringing their best selves to work. When COVID happened, I think we ended up getting an insight into people's lives in a way that we never had before. And those lines of between work and home and work and personal life got a bit more blurred. You know, we got to see people's dogs, we got to see people's kids, families, homes, etc., etc. And as a result, then we got to understand more things about individuals and their wellness, their mental health, individuals and, you know, other facets of their lives. And as a result, it's more blurred, because in my time when I was going through menopause, and, you know, even earlier than that, you never discussed anything other than work. You showed up for work, you did a great job, and you left. And it was only with very close friends that you may have declared more stuff. But it was really a very delineated work-life kind of scenario. Whereas now, it's much more, I think, 360 or much more kind of integrated and rounded. So we deliver training. So it's whether it's online through e-learning or whether it's virtual live or it's in-person live. And for example, this morning, I was with a great place to work organisation called Unum. And they had been trained this morning. It must be, I think it was 50-50 men, women, male managers and leaders, female managers and leaders. And men were engaged in the conversation. And we had scenarios about, you know, how a scenario might arise within the workplace and how they might handle it. And they all got stuck in and were discussing it and were very engaged and so on. And people are saying, look, we hear about this much more in the media. We want to know about it. We want to be able to support our partners at home if they have people like that, or parents, mother, sisters, or they want to be able to support their teams. So we are getting more and more men, and I encourage organisations to have male allies, because women have enough issues of their own, and we don't want to sort of put them in the corner there going, you know, talk to yourselves there about the solutions. And we want it to be a gender balanced conversation, and we want males to engage. And we also want senior leaders actually to engage in this conversation. So the MD of the business was there and you know, kicking off the session and so on, a male as it happened as well. So that was fantastic. But we do need senior leaders to come out and talk about this to personal experience, or if they're brave enough, because that opens up the conversation. So senior men are giving a signal to others in the organisation that this is important, and men are encouraged to engage. And then individuals see senior leaders talking about it and go, okay, well then it's maybe safe for me to engage. And so, yes, but we haven't got enough males. That's the issue. We haven't got enough males, and we'd like to have many more. So any concepts or ideas to help would be really valuable.
I always feel it's a good thing to showcase when things are being done well as well. And I think collectively, Great Place to Work and yourself, Laura, I think we can come together and start showcasing when we've seen good allyship, right? Perhaps from males as well. Showcase that, story tell that. And I think that'll probably lead more involvement as well. And I think you talked about safety there, and I think safety is so important, right, for males and females to be able to come together in a safe way and talk about these topics, and for it safe around language. And if the wrong words are being used, once it's coming from a good place, then I think curiosity will be sparked. And one of the things I've loved hearing back from some of the companies who are doing great storytelling around the menopause is the males are coming up to the company after and saying, thank you very much for sharing that. And not only did I learn a lot, but I also now have a better understanding of something perhaps that they're experiencing in their own person.
Yeah. 100%. I was down in Cork last week, and we've a clinic down there, and I was doing some training, and I was checking out the hotel, and I thought this was a great story because, and the guy, at the checkout or behind the desk or whatever said, whenever listen, I hope you have a great day. Have you anything interesting planned or whatever? And of course, never to miss an opportunity to talk about menopause. I said, I can never guess. And so we started a conversation, and I was absolutely gobsmacked. He said, oh yeah, he said, my wife's going through perimenopause. Bear in mind, 6 years ago, I didn't know that word. And he said, she asked me to listen to some podcasts, which I've been doing on the drive from Moy to Ballincollig, where our clinic is. And he said, I've learned so much. And now I can be more involved, more supportive, more empathetic, rather than say in his father's time where, men didn't go to the birth of their children. Men didn't ever get involved in women's issues. So I do think that as people, we're maturing around some of these conversations. And even yesterday we had, in the panel discussion that I was chairing, we had the discussion from Riley, who were talking about, period health at work and menstrual health at work and so on. And, I never imagined I'd see the day when that would be openly discussed in the workplace. And it was just fantastic to have that. And we had male allies like on the stage with us who were, happy to talk about what they were doing in their workplaces to support women going through various life stages, but also men going through various life stages, and all colleagues really going through life stages. And so this isn't just about women. We have lots of work to do around areas to support men. So therefore it's about being inclusive. And it's, as you say, about being able to have the best version of our staff and employees in the workplace with us.
And with all of this, we're learning how to be a better teammate.
Yeah,
that's so important.
Absolutely.
How to be a better teammate.
Yeah,
learn
absolutely
what your teammate needs. I'm curious and be there for them. So yeah. You spoke at the start there, Loretta. You said there was no such thing as a magic wand. I wouldn't say that to Harry Potter fans. But perhaps there's not, right? So no magic wands, but you're on this journey. You've been doing great work. You're leading the charge in terms of organizations now really starting to storytell and do great things in this area. Where would you like to see this in 2 years' time? No magic wand, but how do you see it developing?
Well, I'd like to think that I'd like to see that organizations are embracing those steps we talked about, that sort of roadmap. Training, policy development. I'd like to see that we were able to track impact. I'd like to be able to, and obviously by showcasing, I'd like organizations to be accredited so then that they're signaling to all of their staff, to their future employees, they're enhancing their employer value proposition by signaling to the world that they're menopause supportive. And I'd love it to be beyond Ireland and the UK. I'd like to see, countries like the States. Now this, you said 2 years, I'm probably talking 5 years. But anyway, countries in Europe, continental Europe, because they haven't started these conversations just yet. So that's what I'd love to see. I'd love to see Ireland and the UK leading the world on this, showcasing best practice, and that others would start to engage on this topic. And then I'd be really happy.
Right. And we're very much leading the charge here, right, in Ireland, which is great, because typically typically people practices come from the US. We think it's cool. We adopt a version of it. The opposite is true. Like if you think of the submissions we got this year to the menopause
Awards,
public sector, small organizations, hotels, incredible work being done.
Yeah, and we're actually, so Ireland is leading the way in this, and I know that the Minister Roderick Gorman is out doing research into menstrual health and health in the workplace with a view to bringing in, some guidelines around that. And so I know more will be coming in this space. But I do think that, we've had some great entrants, as you said. And what we're doing now is we're doing a Hear From webinar series where organizations can come and listen or get a recording after the event and listen to some of the companies that enter the awards and what they're doing in the space. And it covers big companies, small companies, public sector. We had the Garda Síochána and the Irish Police Force on last week with yourself and Nora Casey, two of the judges. We're having Kellanova, which was Kellogg's, coming on, but we're also having the IRFU, the Irish Rugby Football Union. We're having Bank of Ireland, we're having University College Dublin, UCD, and we're having Lidl, and we're having some of these companies come on and share what they're doing. And that will help others understand that maybe it's not as daunting a task or as huge a task or as expensive a task as they might imagine. So I think there's a lot to be learned from others who are doing great work in this space.
Loretta, what do you do to relax? Like, how do you like to relax in terms of health?
How do I like to relax? Well, I like exercise. And one of the things I've been out talking to people about is building muscle, strength or whatever, particularly as you become postmenopausal. So I started doing the old resistance training in the gym and so on. So I do resistance bands and I do some weights. I'll be watching the rugby at the weekend. I'll be going for dinner with friends. I'll be hanging out with my family. Do lots of things to relax.
Very good.
I'd like to do more.
Well,
but I'm on a mission.
Yeah, I know you're on a mission, Loretta, and something, an area like this needs people to be on a mission around, right? And I think, we've met a few years now, and I think the work you're doing for workplaces, for females who are at perimenopause, menopause stage, but also younger females within the workforce as well, creating that awareness early on and then being allies. And also that you're encouraging more male allies in this topic is just so important, right? And to get it to where it is now, it takes somebody like you with that sort of, that almost, if you don't mind, that warrior sort of focus and mindset and approach and all of that, and you're doing fantastic work. You really are, Loretta. So well done and congratulations and all of that. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. And it might sound like the Mutual Admiration Society, but what I will say is that it helps when you get people who get it, like yourselves, a great place to work, who've supported us. And bear in mind, we're a small business, only out of the traps a couple of years, but it really means a lot, to work with an organisation like yourselves who already, have years of experience in this place and in this space of, great workplaces and in great place for women to work. So it really, that means a lot to us, that somebody of your stature in terms of business and a brand would partner with us. So I appreciate all the support, to be honest, because that makes it a little bit easier.
Now, we're here to support you, Loretta. We've done some good work together. We've more to do.
We have more to do.
But really appreciate the journey so far. Thanks for joining us, Loretta.
Thank you.
Red Cube listeners, thank you very much for joining us today. Please subscribe to our podcast if you haven't already done so. And of course, leave us a review and tell us what topics